sun protection, pesticides, and loneliness, and smoking all have something in common. Yes, they're extremely damaging for our health. Yes, sun protection damaging to our health. Loneliness damaging to our health. And loneliness is not necessarily the number of friends. It is a perception of loneliness. So you can have friends, but still be lonely. And pesticides, yes, they are really damaging to our health. And all of them are linked to cancer. All of them are linked to a reduction in lifespan, longevity. So this episode of Me and My Health Up is to really help you understand how these are driving illness and how to actually protect yourself from these damaging effects of pesticides, loneliness, and sun protection. Obviously, smoking's one that we're well aware of. And just for those that have joined this episode, you've joined Me and My Health Up. I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And that's what I do in every episode. And this one is insights that I've come across during my research over completing 250 podcast episodes. Yes, hit the 250 mark and still going strong, still continuing to invest in knowledge, dig down into the literature and research and help you better understand what's supportive of your health and well-being. In previous episodes, we've covered sun and how it's helpful and is really helpful for longevity, lifespan, and health span. And I've also covered loneliness in previous episodes as well. But for those that have just recently joined Health Up, I want to summarize it for you because this is the 250 edition of Me and My Health Up, or approximately around that. So this episode, we're going to delve into these areas of loneliness, pesticides, and sun protection, and how in some ways they're equivalent to smoking. And that's what the literature, the research is telling us. So I was looking through the literature and research and found that pesticides consumption, and we all consume pesticides inadvertently through our food and the food ecosystem, because Roundup, which is made by Bayer, is heavily used by agriculture. And even if we in a sort of consuming organics, and that's much better, there's potential in the food chain that they could get contaminated, or they could get contaminated by close proximity farms with the air, depending on the air direction and it blowing the spray. Yeah, so there's many ways in which we can get exposed to pesticides. And the initial research that Bayer convinced the government that Roundup was really helpful for our agricultural system and that it would improve certainly crop yield. What they said was they've developed a formula that inhibits the shikimate pathway, and the shikimate pathway is exclusive to bacteria, right? So these pesticides have this shikimate pathway, and what the pesticide does is block that pathway and in essence causes death. However, what they convinced the government with was humans don't have this shikimate pathway and that it would cause ill harm or no harm to humans, which we are realizing now that is completely false and incorrect, because we have bacteria that resides within us and it has a symbiotic relationship with us. So it sits within us and it helps us. It helps us break down foods. It makes vitamins for us. It makes serotonin, and it plays a crucial role to our well-being. It is linked to better mental health outcomes. It is linked to better liver function, linked to kidney, better gut function. It's linked to essentially all facets of our well-being. And it's all because of the bacteria that resides within us. Obviously, we want a nice balance of bacteria, and we don't want any bad bacteria overgrowing because that causes illness. However, what this pesticide does, the Roundup does, is it kills all bacteria. So even the good stuff that nourishes us, it gives us vitamins and serotonin and produces anti-inflammatory produce that helps bring down the inflammation, such as butyrate. So what is missing in that research that was put forward to the government to say that pesticides are safe is the fact that they're ignoring how bacteria plays such a crucial role in our health and well-being, because when we consume pesticides, they kill all of our bacteria. They're indiscriminatory. It just goes and attacks the good stuff and the bad stuff, and it's causing illness. And this research paper that I was reading is saying that it is as damaging. So pesticides exposure is as damaging as what smoking is in terms of causing cancer. So pesticides are driving cancer and neurological conditions as much as what smoking does. And so that's what the paper was saying, that pesticides are equivalent to smoking in a sense of equivalent rates of cancer causing. In particular, the pesticides drive lymphoma, they drive non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and they also drive colon cancer. These are the well-known links to pesticides, and it kills our gut bacteria. So it affects our digestive system. It causes inflammation. It causes damage to the gastrointestinal lining, which causes inflammation, drives inflammation. And obviously inflammation that constantly resides or is constantly flared up. If we have our guts constantly flared up, we've got constant inflammation, and that can cause miscommunication, missignaling within the body, which can drive autoimmune conditions. So pesticides are equivalent to smoking. And so what can you do about this? Well, what we want to do is consume organics where possible, or consume, if you want to save a bit of money, consume the fruits and vegetables that aren't sprayed as much as the ones that are heavily sprayed. So what you want to Google is the Dirty Dozen. The Dirty Dozen highlights essentially the crops that are heavily sprayed, the fruit and vegetables that are heavily sprayed. You want to buy them in organic. The ones that the clean 15, so to speak, aren't heavily sprayed, and you can buy them fine as conventional. But I would have thought that the organic purchasing is more conventional or more traditional. So please buy organic with respect to those fruit and veggies that are considered and classified the Dirty Dozen. And in terms of the Clean 15, you can save some money there. Make sure you thoroughly wash any fruit and vegetables, ideally with a tablespoon of vinegar with the water, and filter water ideally, and that will help limit and reduce the pesticides that you're consuming. So that's the best tip I can give you around minimizing pesticides exposure. Obviously, don't use Roundup in your backyard, and encourage your neighbors not to use it. And ultimately, we need to learn to live with things like bindies. Bindies have always coexist, and they obviously fill the space that the grass doesn't fill. And it's just like any perceived weed, is that, it's perceived. I mean, there's benefits to having bindies as well. It's not just drawbacks to having the bindies. So I'd say live with the bindies, learn to live with nature, embrace nature, because having a bindi is far better than having pesticides going through your skin into your body. As I've just shared, in terms of the damaging effect of pesticides is equivalent to the association with smoking causing cancer. You have the same equivalent with pesticides driving cancerous rates, just the same as what smoking does. The next one I want to get into is loneliness. So this was a study. It's a study that's still going today. It's the longevity study conducted by Harvard University. It's also called the Study on Happiness. And what they did back in 1936 was they studied a group of men in the Boston area, those going to Harvard University. That was part of the group. And then the other part of the group was lived in less privileged areas, much lower socioeconomic areas of Boston. And what they studied was these men were growing up, and they did a lot of questionnaires. They did a lot of blood analysis. They studied these people's lifestyle and their social circles. And over time, over this period of nearly 100 years, that's coming up to 100 years, is what they found in this study was that men that had the best connection, social connection in their 50s were the happiest in their 80s. And what they've concluded from the study was how important it is to maintain social connection. And in this study, what they found, it's the deep social connection. The other outcome from the study was that loneliness, and again, this is perceived loneliness. So people can have friends, but if they're not deep relationships, then they can perceive themselves as just having shallow relationships and no real connection. It's a perception around the level of connection. And what they found was those that had perceived loneliness had equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So those that perceived that were lonely was equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of detrimental health outcomes. So that's what the study concluded. What can you do about it? Well, with loneliness, it is in essence about developing deep connections. And this is what came out of the study, is invest time into deep connections. So really go about developing close relationships and deep relationships as opposed to wide relationships. So it's sort of like an inch wide and a mile deep in terms of relationships, not a mile wide and an inch deep. A mile wide, inch deep is most likely going to result in loneliness. However, if you've got an inch wide and a mile deep relationship, then that is much better for you. Focus on those top 5 relationships around you. It is what the science says, in essence, that we can maintain 5 strong, deepest connections. And so pick those 5 people and continuing to continuing to invest time into those relationships. Catch up with those people regularly and really connect at the deepest level. And how to connect at the deepest level, it requires you to be present and really focus on the conversation, focus what they're saying, focus on what you're feeling in terms of their body language. If you draw that focus, in essence, what happens is you develop a stronger bond between one another because that person knows that you're present. They'll know that you're not present when you're looking at your phone or you're looking around at other people and look distracted. What you want to do is zone in and focus on that person as if they're the most important person in the world. And that comes from How to Influence and Win, or How to Win Friends and Influence People book is, in essence, treat them as the most important person in the world. And they are in that moment, because you're spending time with them. So your time is extremely valuable. And if you're spending time with anyone, you want to make sure it's well invested. What's the point of spending time with someone if you're distracted? So turn off your phone or leave your phone behind when you catch up with these people and purely focus in on what you're hearing and what you're feeling from that person. And through that, you'll develop a deep connection. Listen, active listen. So it's about listening and not judging. So certainly not judging what they're saying or not comparing your life to their life. It is just listening, purely listening to what they're saying and understanding what they're saying and continuing to ask questions to get a better understanding of what they're saying. And that will develop a great connection. You'll obviously develop that oxytocin connection. You'll develop the oxytocin within you. They'll develop it within them and you feel connected. That's our connection. Neurotransmitter is oxytocin. We secrete that when we feel connected. So it's really important that you make sure you be present when you're spending time with loved ones or spending time with your top five friendships, and you go deep into those relationships. So make sure you're putting aside time regularly to catch up with these people. And when you're catching up with them, make sure you're totally present and you're not distracted. It's really, really important. So if you don't do that, then obviously you don't produce as much oxytocin and you feel less connected. And that feeling of less connected, you feel less valued, less important. And that can really result in depression. And as a result of depression, can result in losing self-esteem, self-worth, and in essence, you start to question life. And so it's really important that you remain connected with life through people and remain connected with what's most important to you. Because when those have longevity in terms of their life, what they've found common amongst those populations living well in excess of 100 years in the blue zone studies, what they found was the number one thing that really amongst all these people they studied across the globe was that they had meaning and purpose. And it's meaning and purpose that is important to them. And they had a deep connection with that meaning and purpose. So that also helps with connection with the world. And it also helps with connection with people because you come across people that have like-minded values and you connect with them. And so it's really important that you understand what's important to you. You live by that. You'll continually run into people that also value that, and you can develop strong relationships because you have that in common. So that's my tips around minimizing loneliness and maximizing connection. The next one is on sun sun protection, over sun protection. And we live in a society that is constantly telling us to slip, slop, and slap whenever we're outside. What the science is saying is that this is making us sick, ill. It's lowering our lifespan and our longevity, our health span as well, which is the quality of life as we go about living life. Now, there was a study conducted in Sweden. 25,000 women were in this study. And what they did is ask questionnaires. The premise of the study was to find associations and links that sun exposure causes melanoma. In actual fact, what they found, the reverse, that you will lower the rate of melanoma and all-cause mortality the more time you spend in sun. What they asked these women was how much time they spent in the sun in the summer, how much time they spent in the sun in winter, how much time they spent in the sun on vacation when they were visiting other sunny areas, and then how much time they spent in sun tanning salons. And so they measured, basically the time spent exposed to sun equivalent, when you're in those sun tanning beds, UV, exposure in essence, and the sun spectrum equivalent amount of time spent in the sun compared to those that, spent less time in the sun. And what they found from the study was that those that spent more time in the sun were better off in terms of longevity, lifespan, and health span. And in actual fact, those that didn't spend much time in the sun had twice the rate of having all-cause mortality. So they were twice as worse off as those that spent time in the sun in terms of all-cause mortality. And all-cause mortality is death by any cause, right? So those that spent less time in the sun were twice worse off than those that spent time in the sun. And what they found was that those that didn't spend time in the sun or spend less time in the sun had equivalent rates of cancer and all-cause mortality as those that smoked. So how's that? So if you spend less time in the sun, it's just as bad as smoking. If you're hiding from the sun, spending all your time indoors, then in some ways it's linked to equivalent rates of death as caused by smoking. How's that? And so it's really important that you increase your sun exposure as opposed to avoiding sun. So how can you do this safely? How do you go about spending more time in the sun and doing it safely? Well, what's recommended is you spend time in the sun based on your skin type. So those that have fairer skin types need less sun exposure. The important thing about the research is that we need to spend time in the UV part of the day, which is between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. in order to maximize your lifespan and health span and reducing all-cause mortality risk. To do that, we need to create vitamin D because vitamin D is associated with lower rates or higher rates of all-cause mortality and higher rates of all types of diseases, neurological diseases, heart diseases, skin cancer, colon cancer, autoimmune conditions, depression, anxiety. All this is associated strongly with low vitamin D levels. Even COVID-19 is strongly, the risk of dying from COVID-19 is strongly correlated with low vitamin D levels. Skin cancer is strongly correlated with low vitamin D levels. Same with melanoma. So it's really important that we create vitamin D through being in the sun. We actually need direct sunlight. What they've found through research around supplementation for vitamin D is that it's only helpful for rickets. It's not helpful for anything else. So you can't supplement your way out of the sun, right? You can't say, I'm going to stay indoors and take vitamin D because it's not going to help you lower that risk of all-cause mortality, which is equivalent to smoking by avoiding sun, right? So what we want to do is spend more time in the sun. How we do that is based on our skin type. What's recommended is that we need to rise and see the morning sun. When we rise with the morning sun, we get our body in the circadian rhythm and it starts producing things that are going to protect us from getting excessive exposure to the harmful UV radiation around that 10 to 2 p.m. part of the day. What we start producing around the mid-morning, when we start to experience some UV light through the photosensitive receptors on our cells, in our eyes and in our skin, we have this neuropsin. And neuropsin is a UV detector. And then what it does is send signals in the body to the mitochondria to start producing melanin. And what the UVA does in the sun is create this vasodilation. So it's really good for lowering blood pressure. And what it also helps with is getting melanin that's produced in the mitochondria out to the skin through the vasodilating effect. And so this melanin is the skin pigment, is our tan, is what we perceive as tan in our skin or skin color. And that, when it's at our skin, is allowing some UVB in, which we then synthesize vitamin D. So UVB helps the synthesis of vitamin D. And that's what we need more of. And that's what we're lacking. And that's why we're so sick. However, melanin protects us from over UV exposure. And so it provides a protection effect equivalent to SPF 15 is what the research is showing. So yes, you have through proper production of melanin. And again, you don't want to be wearing sunglasses because you want the sun coming into the retina and hitting the photosensitive ganglion cells in the retina. And you also want it hitting the photoreceptors on our cells in our skin. You want the coherent signal. When our body's getting a coherent signal, it does the right thing. You don't want the sunglasses blocking out UV because then that's stopping the production of melanin. You actually want the UVB coming into your eyes so that your body can produce the skin protection from excessive exposure to UV. So you want coherent signals coming through the retina, which is your eye, as well as onto your skin. When you have these coherent signals, you're maximizing your melanin production, which is giving you protection from excessive exposure from UV. In saying that, depending on skin type, you may need to also find shade. And that's the important thing is when you've spent that 5 to 10 minutes in that UV light, then it's time to consider getting into the shade. And what you want to do is, sit in the shade under a tree so that you're still getting the infrared light, right? The infrared light is the non-visible light, which really keeps our engines going. And it obviously also provides other protective effects. So it keeps our mitochondria healthier, keeps our energy production going. It also protects us from heart disease and blood clotting problems that can cause stroke. And so we need this constant exposure to infrared light. We need to be outside to get the infrared light. But under a tree, we're protected from providing shade from the UV, but we're getting the infrared light bouncing off the plants, the green matter around us. So we're still getting the beneficial benefits of the sun, the infrared light, which is regenerating for our cells, also energizing for our cells. And we're not getting too much excessive UVB exposure. So what's recommended is 5 minutes of sun every hour throughout the day in order to keep you in a healthy circadian rhythm, healthy bodily function around the night-day cycle so that your body's doing the right thing at different times of the day and not getting miscommunication from being inside under blue light, which is giving you missed signals telling you it's the middle of the day all day, which is not right? So if you want to control your weight better, spending more time outdoors is really beneficial. It will help with blood sugar regulation. So they've done studies around infrared light, near infrared light, and blood sugar regulation, and the study showed that it gave you a 30% benefit in terms of managing blood sugar by being outside versus inside. And this was done with a terrific study with infrared light on the back and a blood glucose tolerance test. And what they found was that those that had the infrared light on their back regulated their blood sugar 30% better than those that had no infrared light exposure. So yes, infrared light is going to help you manage your blood sugar. It will help you manage your weight in terms of weight management. because it also helps with making, so when we initiate neuropsin, which is through our photoreceptors on our skin and in our retina, when that is initiated, well, the neuropsin picks up, it initiates signals to produce neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, which helps us achieve our goals, which makes us feel well about ourselves, good about ourselves. It picks us up in terms of it produces endorphins as well. So endorphins give that overall feeling of well-being. It's the same effect as what you get when you exercise. You produce endorphins. You also produce endorphins from being in the sun. And in addition to all of this, what we're doing is really helping stimulate alpha MSH, alpha melanin stimulating hormone, alpha melanin stimulating hormone. And alpha MSH is strongly, or low levels of alpha MSH is strongly associated with obesity. High levels of alpha MSH is strongly correlated with less hunger cues and less missignaling to the body that you need food, you need energy. And so it's really important to keep your alpha MSH at healthy levels in order to manage your weight. And that's done through UV exposure. So we do need to spend time in the sun between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. As I said, you could start with 5 minutes every hour, and based on your skin type, then adjust accordingly. So 5 minutes every hour is not going to cause problems. It's the burning of the skin that we don't want. And so we can do it safely by just spending small amounts of time in the sun and build that up over time, because over time you'll start to develop a solar callus, which is the tan, the skin complexion, that darkening of the skin complexion. Again, your ability to develop that skin complexion will depend on your skin type to begin with. So really important, in summary, that we need to spend more time in the sun and less time protecting ourselves from the sun, ultimately for good health, but we need to do it based on our skin type. When I say more time in the sun, today we're spending very little time in the sun. I think most of our lives, the research is showing we spend 95% of our time indoors and 5% time outdoors. What we want to do is increase that time spent outdoors. So we want to increase that 5% that we're currently spending outdoors. And that's not a lot, right? It's not really, even if you went to 10% outdoors, it's still significantly better. It's double than what you're doing better, double the time you're spending today outdoors, which is going to significantly improve health outcomes for you. And it will help lower the risk of cancer, help lower the risk of all-cause mortality, and help increase your health span, which is your health, your optimal health is health span, is your ability to be at optimal health, and your lifespan, which is the time you spend on planet Earth. And you can do this by just spending more time in the sun, but doing it wisely based on your skin type. So that is it for this episode. So in conclusion, what we want to do is be wary of pesticides, and we certainly want to be buying organics, certainly around the dirty dozen. So Google the dirty dozen and you'll find those fruit and vegetables that are heavily sprayed. Again, there's the Clean 15. You can buy that non-organic. And then you want to make sure you're washing both organic and doing it with some vinegar and filtered water, ultimately, and doing it really well, spending good time amount washing it like you wash your hands. You want to spend that on each fruit and vegetable. And in addition, we want to focus on our top 5 contacts, our top 5 relationships, and invest time into those relationships continually develop deeper relationships with those top 5 contacts to minimize loneliness or the perception of loneliness. And thirdly, we want to increase our time in the sun and do that based on our skin type. And I've shared all the benefits of spending more time in the sun and doing it wisely. So that's it for this week's episode of Me and My Health Up. If you've got any questions, please reach out and connect with me, ask questions. I will happily answer them. And I want to hear from you. I want to hear what you're liking about each episode, what you'd like in terms of new guests, what you'd like to hear more about. I would love to hear from you. And I want to thank you for your support in listening to Me and My Health Up. It certainly provides a great avenue for me to share my knowledge and what I'm learning with you and continuing to help health up the universe, health up the world, and make it a healthier place. As I said, I'm on a mission to enhance and enlighten the well-being of others. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of Health Up.
Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand me&my Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. me&my Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, me&my Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of me&my Health Up.